I'm going to share the screen. Which I hope you can all see now. Can you all see this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, which for most people, it means getting computers to think like people, more or less. Um, so we need to understand how people think, actually, in order to understand what to do with computers. So we're going to start with human intelligence tonight. And what is intelligence? By the way, feel free to stop me and ask questions at any point. My screen, just all of you have disappeared almost, except for one or two people. So I can see my own presentation, but I can't see you too well. So I'm relying on you to help with that. Let me see. Okay. Okay, so what is intelligence? First of all, what we're not talking about is like military intelligence or the kind of intelligence that CIA gathers about various topics. That's basically just information, right? That's not what we're talking about. Intelligence, the simplest definition that I can give you is that intelligence is what enables human beings to solve problems, right? But there are many kinds of intelligence. There's not just one kind. Um, we talk about logical intelligence, for example, to be able to say um, what cause and effect between two events might be, or linguistic intelligence is the ability to easily pick up languages. Spatial intelligence, to think in three dimensions, something very useful when you are piloting a plane, for instance. Emotional intelligence, being able to anticipate and understand what someone else is feeling when you're talking to them. So if you wanted to get my attention, I think you're probably gonna have to speak because I can't see everybody who is there. So if you raise your hand, I probably won't see you. Anyway, think of a calculator. Calculator can solve math problems, right? You punch in a few numbers, you hit the equal sign, and you get an answer. Is that an example of intelligence?
Sir, I would say that it's not an example of intelligence because calculators don't have adaptability to them.
That's true. What do calculators do? They do,
Pre-programmed stuff.
yes, a very limited thing. What about something like Microsoft Word or Minecraft? Do they have intelligence?
I think Microsoft Word does, because now that they're trying to correct your speech, it's actually looking. No,
Hmm.
I don't know. It's a good question.
Cadet Singh, I see a hand up.
Sir, I believe that Microsoft Word used to have or actually still does probably, because I think they have like sort of like assistants to help you with writing, and the same with, and sort of like with Minecraft as well. You also have sort of artificial intelligence that controls the mobs in the game.
Mm-hmm. So the folks who make software like to market them in various ways, and artificial intelligence is a very trendy expression, and they try to pass things off as intelligent when in fact They're not really. But so when we talk about artificial intelligence in the computer science sense, which is what I'm going to do, I'm going to modify the definition, the ability to solve problems. Well, Word can solve a problem, Microsoft can solve problems, but an artificial intelligence can solve a problem that it's never seen before. It can solve an unfamiliar problem. That's the hallmark of a uh, intelligent program or an intelligent being from the perspective of computer science, right? So let's talk about making a computer do that. Well, how can we enable a computer to independently solve an unfamiliar problem? It's not an easy thing. It's complicated, but the place you need to start to really understand where to go is to understand how human beings do this. Because the way to create a computer program that can solve problems that it's never seen before is going to need to behave a lot like a human being when they solve problems. So what is human intelligence is what we come back to. Do we understand our own intelligence? Most of us don't, actually. So let's explore that question. How do humans solve unfamiliar problems? Let's find out. You can all see what's on my screen, right?
Yes, sir. Do you want us to give you an answer, or
What do you think?
Cohen, would you like to provide an answer?
Yes, sir. I believe it would be A because in this pattern, there's 3 of each dot pattern, and there's only 2 of A.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think I would have to agree with that because it's, as long as you're working on the horizontal basis, you don't have any other information on you other than the fact that you've got some pictures here. Is it trying to figure out all 9 of these, or is it 3 in a row?
In addition, sir, every row and column, if you add up the number of dots, it would be 6.
Yes.
Sharp eye, Mr. Shankar.
Mhm. Uh, I think someone has a hand up. Mr. Singh?
Yeah.
I wish I
Uh,
could see all of you somehow. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Singh.
Sir, I believe that it is also A as well, and I agree with everyone who answered because in the first 2 rows they have all 3 numbers 1, 2, and 3. Then the third row you just need the 1 left.
Okay. Does anyone disagree? I hear no disagreements. Then
I
let's
think
go on to,
logically anything else wouldn't make sense.
all right. What about this one?
Sure. I think it would be E because in every row, the first 2 numbers add up to the third number.
Any other thoughts? Does that mean everyone agrees?
Logically, I think we're all going to agree that yes, because everything on the first two adds up to the last one.
Okay. What about this one?
I think it would be A again because it's a very clear pattern.
I would disagree, and I would say that is D based on how the pattern is.
I think both of you need to explain now what you mean by the pattern.
I'm sorry, sir. I actually misread the chart. So yeah, I would agree with it being A because the first row is 1, 2, and then diagonal 2. The middle row is 3, 4, 3. And I would have to assume that the bottom row would be the opposite of the first row, where it's a diagonal 2, a horizontal 2, and then a single 1.
Any other thoughts?
Something tells me that we have to have a higher number in there.
I just take a quick survey here. Who finds this challenging?
Extremely. I'll vouch for the first one.
Yes, this is challenging. Those of you who feel this is challenging, uh, Cadet Bell, explain why it's challenging.
I wouldn't say challenging, but like it makes you think and in a critical way. Like you have to think of um different arguments that other people would say to counter your argument and why you think your answer is right. And then you also have to think of different variations that it could be and why that variation is wrong or why it's right.
Hmm? Any other thoughts? Cadet Christie.
I think that this one especially is a bit harder than like the other ones because kind of like what Bell said, you have to come up with a pattern or an explanation, but there's not a lot to go off of.
I'm going to go back now to the beginning of the patterns and talk about some of the things that you did that you're probably not aware of. First of all, I gave you no information whatsoever when this picture first appeared. Most of you worked out in your heads anyway that this was a kind of a problem, and most of you fairly quickly figured out that what you had to do was fill in the last box, and that the last box there were 5 alternative answers for at the very bottom. I didn't tell you any of those things. You figured that out somehow. The other thing that happened was that you immediately made interpretations of this image. I mean, what I put in front of you here is a field, 9 gray fields, and a bunch of black dots on the gray fields. You almost immediately interpret those black dots as numbers. They're not numbers, they're just black dots. But you drew on your experience with dice and math and interpret them as quantities. And you looked at them in terms of numbers, right? And we went to the second one, and you're still looking at them as numbers because not only you're not looking at just numbers, you're also drawing on your knowledge of arithmetic. You're adding those numbers together and coming up with sums, all unprompted. And you're testing to see if all the lines add up to the last number of dots that you see. And then from that, guessing that the last box should be the sum of 3 and 2, which would be 5. Here, the third one, the principle here is not numerical. The principle of organization here is something different. And most of you grasp that, if not immediately, but after a while. What you're looking here is a visual pattern. And the name of the game here is symmetry. Symmetry about the center, right? The center is 4, but on either side of it, you have the same symbol reflected as if through a mirror through the center. So this one should be a single dot like the first one. You did an amazing amount of processing to solve those first 3 problems that were not too difficult. This one is trickier. Give this one a shot.
I believe that would be C.
Please explain how you're thinking.
On the previous 2, the singular image goes into a sort of distorted image, and then the resulting is a sort of, like you described with the other one, a mirror between the middle. So for the 1, it becomes 2. For the 2, it becomes 3 because it's mirrored down the center dot. And then for the last one, it would be E because it would be mirrored down the center dot again.
So your answer would be E, is that right?
No, I believe it would be C.
C, okay. Others? Did I see a hand from Cadet Dalton?
I agree that it would be C, sir.
And how would you explain?
The same way that it was explained, like sort of mirroring it. And then also the second pattern, it stays the same in the top of the third pattern. And C is the only case where it does that for the last set.
So how would you describe the principle of organization here? What is it you're perceiving? Because again, we're just looking at dots, right? But you are providing a context in your mind from your experience of something. And I'm interested in digging into what it is you're actually doing. How are you interpreting these images? Christy's shaking her head. I can see that. Cadet Baptist? No? Cadet Asimov? What do you see?
I also agree, sir, with what Cadet Cohen said that it would be C, because I'm just trying to follow the pattern from the first row to the second row to the third row.
Yeah.
And what I see is it kind of duplicates itself and then sits on kind of itself. It doesn't completely set to the side, because for the second row, it's kind of, you have to deduce. So if it did sit next to each other, it's replication, then there would be 4, but it kind of sat on itself. So there's 3. So then I kind of tried to follow that same pattern for the third one.
Yeah. Can you see this as a process?
Yes, sir.
Each line is a process.
Yes.
First one, you have a set of dots, and then those dots divide, split apart into 2. But that's the first one. What happens in the second row? Why don't we get 4?
Because the replication overlaps on itself.
That's right. The 2 middle dots end up in the same place. So it looks like 1 dot because they're overlapping each other. And then the third one is, well, you have 2 2s and 1 1 in a different pattern. So yes, C would be the correct answer. Because again, the middle dots are overlapping.
My eyes just went blurry. Funny thing, I went to go try to get a job working at SNET back in the day, and they put us through tests just like this.
Did they now?
Yeah, this and multiple different color strands and whatnot for working on high density cables with many strands in there. This was the hardest part of the whole test.
Interesting.
Sir, I'd say the answer is D. Because it looks like on the top 3 rows, the images are almost stacking on top of each other to create the bottom row image. So following that pattern creates the full 2x4 box, which is D. Cadet Baptist, you want to say something?
Go ahead.
Sir, I was gonna say C, but I think I'd agree with D more. Cause I was gonna say for C, I was gonna say if you look at diagonally, like from across, from top left to bottom right, it looks like the middle 2 are like flipped, like the gray part is sort of flipped, and then well you can't flip the top left, so it's just BC.
Any other thoughts?
I very much agree with Major Srivastava because I was kind of struggling to find the pattern, but I think that's a very logical solution.
I also agree with Major Srivastava, but I came to that conclusion a little differently because it looks like you have the 4 at the top, and then it uses every combination of dots under that 4 in all of the open boxes. So the only thing left would be D.
Is that Cadet Dalton?
Yes, sir.
I can't see your image, but That's very perceptive. There are 2 rows of dots, right? The top row is always the same. It doesn't change. So there's really no information there that matters here. The bottom row, Cadet Dalton is absolutely right. It goes through every possible combination of 4 dots. And the only one that is missing is all 4 of them showing. And actually, incidentally, this is the way binary math works. This is a binary representation of the numbers 0 through 16 in binary. If that doesn't make any sense to you, that's fine. One more. And let's have someone else answer first besides Cohen. Cadet Singh, what are you seeing?
I believe it's going to be letter B.
And what are you seeing that makes you choose B?
Well, I chose actually sorry, I meant D instead. Because I noticed that it was rotating around and it kept on adding 1 dot to the side every time it rotated. So so I thought since it'll eventually rotate back to its normal state, and it looks like it's rotating by like a certain area where it could just get there in like a short amount of time. I thought it would just be D because it would reset back to 2 dots since it was at the bottom.
Any other thoughts? Oh, I see. Is that a hand raise from Cadet Series? He actually used the yellow. I've never seen. Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be B because it goes in a pattern of it goes from, so I didn't really pay attention to the 5 dots in the middle at first. So the outside dots went 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2. So it went back and forth, up and down from 4 to 1. And then I also noticed how B it's facing down, and so the last one as 4, so it would go down to 3, and it's also facing like up to the right, and the next one after that on other ones, it would face down.
Okay. So let me ask you: is there more than one thing going on here? I'm out of time, aren't I? I'm at 7:45. Do I need to stop?
No, sir, you're good to keep on going for at least 15 more minutes.
50?
15, sir.
15. Okay, excellent. All right, wonderful. 15. Please just speak, because I can't see you raise your hand. So please just speak up if you want to speak.
Sir, I separated it into the 2 different parts, like the main middle, the 5 dots that were rotating, and then the dots on the outside, because I found it to be simpler to focus on one at a time rather than everything as a whole.
Yes.
I definitely agree with. All right. Anyway, I think the theory that the outside ones are changing number makes sense because if you look, the different lines are in a continual. Like if you put it row 1, 2, 3, and then 4, they would all share that pattern in a linear sense.
I'm not sure I understand quite yet.
If you actually laid out, if you physically put row 1 first, and then
Yes.
row 2, 3, and 4 after that, the pattern of the outside ones going up and then down would be consistent.
Does everyone understand what Cohen is saying?
I do, sir.
Would you put it in your own words? I'd like to hear how you would
So
put it.
it's kind of like if you were reading a book line by line, like left to right, line by line. You count the numbers up. It goes 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it keeps going back and forth from 1 to 4.
Okay.
And so she's saying if you laid it out, then that pattern would be consistent along the whole thing, which would mean the answer would be B with the numbers on the outside.
True enough. Does the position of the dots matter at all?
Sir, I definitely agree that it's B, but I came at it with a different way. So if you look at the first sort of area, the top left, the position of like where the dots are pointing are down. So and then you see that that repeats every 3, yeah, every 3 boxes, and then it goes from 2 to 3, then 2 to 3, then 2 to 3, back and forth. So I put B because if you look at B, it'd be 2 to 3 outside dots.
Hmm? B is the correct answer. But let me suggest something to you. You're correct that this is a time series. This is like uh, watching an animated film almost. Each one is a frame, right? Can I draw on this? Are there
There
tools
is,
for me?
there's a,
Okay, there
you
you
have to
go.
share screen and go to the whiteboard.
All right. So let me suggest that there are 3 things going on at the same time here independently. The thing in the middle that looks like a T, you're right. Most of you proceed. It's rotating. And it completes a rotation every 3 images, right? You see that? This dot travels up and down. Here it's going down. 1, 2, 3, 4. In the first row, and then in the next row, it goes up again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you see how that repeats every 4 images? And the last thing that happens is 3 light bulbs, as it were, 1, 2, 3, that turn on and off. The first light bulb comes on, then the second light bulb comes on, the third light bulb comes on, and the first light goes off, the second light bulb goes off, and the third light bulb goes off, and that repeats. So that's a repeating cycle of 6 panels. So it's very confusing when you're first looking. It looks completely chaotic. It's because you have 3 different processes going on that are repeating at different rates. And so that's difficult to perceive. But you found the right answer anyway because you found other features that told you what the right answer would be. So this one was quite challenging.
So does that make that artificial intelligence just because of the fact, yes, there was 3 different things going on, but it took us one pattern to figure it out?
Well, what I'm saying, okay, how do I clear all drawing? It's not artificial intelligence. This is human intelligence. You are all incredibly intelligent, and let's talk about the things that you know how to do that we would have to replicate with machines in order to do true artificial intelligence, right? You are all very good at recognizing patterns of information. That's kind of what we were doing in this exercise. They were just dots. They were dots configured in different ways, and you recognize patterns in those dots. Much in the same way that people throughout history have looked up at the stars and seen constellations rather than individual dots of light. You join them together and looked at them as patterns. And then from those patterns, you're remembering things that you know, concepts. You're remembering from previous experience about numbers, about arithmetic, about symmetry, about recurring cycles. These are all things that are in the back of your mind. And you drew on that knowledge without really being fully aware that you were doing it when you were puzzling out what these images meant. But that's what human beings are so very well built to do, is to find meaning in the patterns around us. You recognize the patterns and you interpret them in terms of your previous knowledge and experience. So to you, they weren't just dots, they were numbers, or they were a pattern, or they were a sequence of events. But sequence of events and numbers, all those things are concepts. These are ideas that don't have any physical being. These are thoughts and concepts that we humans share and use with each other when we communicate and we work out problems. But they're not real. They are thoughts. They are imagined things that we have come up with that help us solve problems. You're also good at filtering out noise, of focusing on what is important and ignoring the rest. We saw a literal example of that. Somebody was focusing on the T in the middle and the rotation and ignoring the dots on the sides, right? That's filtering information to isolate a pattern that seems important in the face of patterns that are apparent to be random and don't have any information. Or like with the 2 rows there, I said it was a binary counter. The top row was constant, it didn't change. And so most of you probably very quickly stopped focusing on that row because it wasn't changing. The important information wasn't in that row. And then humans excel at coming up at possible answers that fit the interpretation, and you test your answer by looking at different cases in the data, in the dots, and say, well, I have this idea. Does it fit every case? And when you have ideas that don't fit the data very well, you very quickly reject them and don't consider them further. And so you can zero in on what's important and zero in on the stuff that's going to lead to a solution. Oh, that's what I just said. Testing for answers for validity and consistency to select the best answer. So these are skills that you all have as human beings. Whether you did well at this or not doesn't matter, because different people have different kinds of intelligence. But you would be able to apply similar process to other areas where you may have more natural gifts. This was an exercise that was very graphically. I mean, graphics. It was thinking in terms of visual graphics. And if you're not a visual person, then this may have been extra challenging for you. But your intelligence, as I'm sure you have intelligence in other areas, if this was not one, you're doing the same kinds of things. You're drawing on experience, you're putting things together, and you come up with answers to problems you've never seen before. And that is what we're going to talk about next time I talk about artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk about how we actually make computers do those kinds of things. Because that is the real challenge when you're trying to do something like come up with a computer program that can independently fly an aircraft and engage in a dogfight and win, which is something the Air Force is actively working on today. And I'm sure that you can see that flying an aircraft and engaging in a dogfight, there are going to be unexpected problems and things that an AI would need to work out that it had never seen before if it was going to be successful. And that's the measure of a good AI, whether or not it's successful at the task that we want it to do. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope we can continue with further discussions in person. It should be easier. Thank you.
It says that I'm unable to share.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Chief Baptist?
I think he accidentally just exited the meeting. He'll be back.
Looks like he's back in. So
Well, can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, so good evening, cadets. So this presentation is just going to be investigating like launch procedures. So what they do on the days before the inspection, the testing they go through for each rocket, and a brief overview of like the training that astronauts have to go through. It's like what environments they have to simulate and how they exactly prepare for launch day. So let's get right into it. So we're going to be talking about basically normally the space shuttle program, and of course this is like the program that's developed to like create these reusable low orbit spacecrafts. It was very innovative, and one of the most unique things was that it used solid rocket booster propulsion systems, and it was a vital part of the United States developing their space program and changing. It closed in 2011, and it was important for like launching important satellites and telescopes like the Hubble, and it helped build the space station. So first, we're going to get into preparing the astronauts. So of course, we went over this in the last presentation, but we have like what it takes to be the astronaut. So of course, now they hire a lot of scientists, pilots, engineers, and they hire a very diverse field of people. And they look for people who have good teamwork and good communication. And of course, it's very selective. About 0.04 to 0.08% are admitted, and it's a very long and stringent process to become an astronaut. What they emphasize swimming skills. In terms of height, you have to be 62 to about 75 inches. Your blood pressure can't exceed 140/90. You need to have like perfect vision. And generally, if you find an astronaut, they're always going to be in better condition than the average person. They're going to be very fit. They're going to be able to move freely in space, and they're going to be, just overall at the peak of fitness. So now we're going to start with simulators. So first, I want to ask people like, what is the definition of like a simulator? Like, what is the purpose, and what does a simulator do? Can anybody in the call answer?
Sergeant, I believe the top left one would be a simulated spacewalk, be underwater, and the second one would be a G-force centrifuge.
Right. So that's actually right. So this one right here is a neutral buoyancy lab at NASA. It's got like 6.2, I think, million gallons of water. And it's just absolutely huge. And water is like much more dense than air. I think they're like 800 times more dense than air. So it's supposed to simulate microgravity. This one right here is a centrifuge machine. So like it like spins over around, like as you can imagine. And it's supposed to like create high G forces that the astronauts would experience when they're dealing with the ascent. And then this one right here is the vertical motion simulator, and it's a flight simulator. It's the largest flight simulator. It moves like within this 10-story tower, and it moves like forward, upward, up, down, and then left, right, which is the 6 ways that flight can move. And it's designed to like teach astronauts about like landing. So that's really what the importance is of this motion simulator. So the point of any simulation at NASA is to basically imitate whatever condition that the astronauts are going to face. And they actually prepare for even worse, because there's about tons and tons of contingencies and issues that they create in these softwares and these technologies. And they try to make it hard for astronauts to succeed, just to make sure they're prepared. But it's virtually impossible for astronauts to even deal with every single one of these failures, but they're still prepared for them, right? So in the shuttle program, what they use was these shuttle mission simulators. And they basically looked at pre-launch, the ascent, the orbit operations, and the entry and the landing. They also had like important simulations for payload operation, deployment, and removal. There were 2 simulators in building 5 and 1 simulator building 35. And this is about 10 months before flight. So astronauts, once they get accepted, they will eventually be assigned to a flight. And once they are assigned to this flight, they're going to use specific softwares that are just assigned for the mission. So they look at specific things that they're going to expect the astronauts to actually do in the mission. And during the last 11 weeks, right before they end their training, mission control and astronauts work together. So mission control, essentially, they coordinate everything and they communicate with astronauts at the time. And they have these intricator simulations where essentially the astronauts communicate with mission control while they're performing the mission. And these assignments, they have to work for around 300 hours before they find that they're certified. It's really about building teamwork and like creating the mission timeline as to like what is a realistic timeline for performing what they have to perform. And they use these like technologies to imitate like what it is, like how exactly they will face, not only like in the ascent, but also like when they're in space. when they're walking around when they're doing spacewalks. And astronauts are described as like extremely realistic. They haven't been able to imitate like the sounds or the vibrations, the feelings, but they've been able to imitate like the visuals, the timing, and they can model all space shuttle systems. And important things are like really mapping what an astronaut's responses are to malfunctions, because that's like the most important thing to be an astronaut. And the Central Simulation Control Office, they maintain the safety and effectiveness of all the simulation technology. And then another important thing of the preparation for astronauts is like right before what goes on is the quarantine. And they're held in isolation before launch to prevent the contraction of illnesses. I mean, I think all of us know what quarantine is now. But before, like astronauts, like 10 to 15 days before, well, not like during the shuttle missions, they only quarantine for about 8 to 11 days, but it's really to prevent illnesses and detect any symptoms. And only one launch has been delayed so far. And just a fun fact was the Apollo missions, they had this mobile quarantine facility, which is like this bus, and they quarantined even after like coming down to like just for at the time certain stigmas, but they quarantined for about 21 days after launch. So that was how astronauts prepared before the launch, and the Apollo mission was also after. So preparing the rocket, right? So this is all the equipment, and there's already been billions of dollars are put in for the preparation. But even before, like the days before, they have to prepare the rocket and create the rocket. But at first, we're going to look at how they test the rocket. So what they have to ensure and what steps they have to go through. So engine testing, which is of course one of the most important elements of the rockets, and engine testing has been like one of the most important things. They've created multiple engine testing facilities. They have one in New Mexico, a large one's also in Ohio, because like research and theoretical models are just always going to be inadequate. You have to test whatever rocket you produce. You have to test whatever rocket you make. And even after testing, there have been rockets that have gone through testing, but they have malfunctioned. So there's not a complete guarantee. So many facilities that they have been using have been contributed to like research alternative forms of propellants. The John C. Stennis is the largest rocket engine facility. It's run by NASA. And propulsion testing is a series of tests. So they run through this sequence of testing. And this common misconception is that they build the rocket and they test the engine. They continuously test the engine even while they're building the rocket, just in case they perfect the engine and make sure that there's no issues when they decide to actually use it. So we got this quick video on how space rockets are tested before launch.
So hot it can boil iron, so noisy it can be heard 60 miles away, and so dangerous it's hosed down with 1 million gallons of water every 3 minutes. Rocket testing, suffice it to say, is quite an intense process. But what actually goes down at a typical modern testing facility? Join us today as we get all fired up for a look at how space rockets are tested. This month marks the 60th anniversary of Russian cosmonaut Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin's pioneering first flight into space. So you'd be forgiven for thinking rocketry was pretty well understood by now. Well, there's actually still a very long way to go. Vast new rockets from SpaceX's awesome Starship to NASA's moon-bound SLS giant are grander than anything attempted during the old school space race. There's also different mission priorities these days, and even different fuel sources. As such, the latest generation rocket engines, be they Elon Musk's mighty Raptors or Uncle Sam's RS-25s from the shuttle program, need to be rigorously put through their paces on terra firma before they're trusted with precious payloads, and of course, delicate human beings. Rocket tests fall into 2 broad categories: sea level ambient and altitude. This distinction is critical because air pressure is greater at sea level than way up off the ground. At altitude, rockets produce more thrust in the thinner air and have to cope with less heat transfer, and these factors have major engineering implications. For sea level tests, the ambient atmospheric conditions surrounding the test area work fine. But testing rockets at altitude is a lot more challenging, as technicians need to simulate conditions way up in the blue sky, but on the ground where they can actually analyze them. For this, rockets are placed in a sealed chamber, where the pressure is sucked out with mechanical pumps to around 0.16 psa, roughly equivalent to the prevailing conditions 100,000 feet above sea level. This sealed environment obviously creates its own problems, so a process known as inerting is introduced, whereby gaseous nitrogen or helium is fed into the chamber to prevent explosive buildup of rocket exhaust matter. Whichever type of test, sea level or altitude, that ferocious exhaust needs to be directed somewhere, typically into a so-called flame bucket or trench. This funnels the heat and energy in a direction where it can't do any harm. The particular fuel source of the rocket is a big determinant in how the rocket is oriented during the test. Liquid rocket engines are typically fired in a vertical position, as gravity is all part of the fuel intake process. Solid rocket engines, alternatively, can be fired horizontally, which requires a smaller and cheaper flame trench. However, this comes with its own issues, not least noise, which we'll come to shortly. So where actually are these testing grounds? Most modern rocket testing facilities are situated in the southern United States in order to be near launch sites, which themselves are frequently close to the Earth's equator. Why are launch sites near the equator? The land around the equator moves at around 1,670 kilometers per hour, while halfway towards the poles, the land only moves 1,180 kilometers per hour. This means launching from the equator helps spacecraft blast off already 500 kilometers per hour faster without additional input of energy. As such, SpaceX has a large rocket testing facility in McGregor, Texas, which is handy for the company's Boca Chica launch and assembly site. But today we'll mostly be focusing on NASA's John C. Stennis Space Center in Hancock County, Mississippi. This is where new SLS rockets are being tried out in preparation for the first Artemis launches later this year, part of an ambitious program to put the first woman and next man on the moon in the next 3 years. Stennis has a fine pedigree in this regard, as it was where rocketry for the first and second stages of the Saturn V lunar landing were tested back in the 1960s. The magnificent landmark A and B test stands are even registered as official National Historic Landmarks. From 1975 to 2009, Stennis also tested the main engines that powered 135 missions of the iconic NASA Space Shuttle. Indeed, those same RS-25 engines that powered the shuttle, with some choice upgrades naturally, will hopefully be sending the SLS to the moon soon. The facility is so integral to American space law, it's said by proud Stennis workers, if you want to go to the moon, you first have to go through Hancock County, Mississippi. Stennis is indeed perfectly situated for rocket testing. It's isolated from major population centers on a 13,800-acre site surrounded by a 125,000-acre buffer zone. There's great access by road and 7.5 miles of specially dug canals, plenty of local water, a supportive local government, and a climate that suits testing, at least when hurricane season isn't in full swing. So what happens in the actual test? During the recent SLS warm-ups at Stennis, a variety of rocket systems were checked over. Modal testing is a way of assessing the overall structural integrity of components, essentially by striking them with a finely calibrated mallet and measuring their resonant frequency. If the frequency is off in some way, it could suggest faulty welds, cracks, or other problems that might jeopardize the ultimate mission. There's a so-called power-up procedure that must be followed to make sure everything comes on correctly and in the right sequence. The avionics, that is the onboard mechanics and electronics, must all be tested and thrown phony curveballs to reveal any unforeseen weaknesses. A crucial aspect of rocket avionics is the gimbaling system, which orients the rocket boosters in order to maintain overall trajectory. This system has its own self-contained hydraulics and must be tested thoroughly. A series of simulated countdowns will take place, ramping up to a so-called wet dress rehearsal, where propellants are flowed into the engine but not ignited. To facilitate the SLS tests at Stennis, some 700,000 gallons of propellant, that's 200,000 gallons of liquid oxygen, and 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen are piped in from 6 floating barges. That's about 114 tanker trucks worth. At the moment of ignition, when the rocket does finally fire, technicians need to keep an eye on some fairly hair-raising physical changes to the rocket. With temperatures ranging from -400 degrees Fahrenheit, thanks to that liquid fuel source, then rising to a few thousand degrees Fahrenheit while alight, the metal tank can grow and shrink by several inches. That infernal exhaust will then jet into the flame chute, requiring 2 separate suppression systems, both fed by a dedicated 66 million gallon reservoir. 240,000 gallons of water every minute gets pumped over the chute to cool the engine exhaust during testing. In addition to that, some 92,000 gallons of water a minute are sprayed through a separate nozzle system to suppress noise. This noise suppression isn't just to help the local property prices. It's to prevent all that acoustic energy disrupting the finely calibrated test equipment or affecting the material performance of the rocket itself. Those gigantic plumes of white smoke you see emanating from Stennis testing rigs are in fact steam from that colossal torrent of much-needed cool water. Stennis has its own high-pressure industrial water facility to manage this aspect of its operation, by the way, and a high-pressure gas facility of HPGF that helps pump gaseous nitrogen into the core stage during testing. This prevents outside air entering the testing zone during those all-important altitude tests. As well as the mechanical side, special software is also deployed during testing to control the avionics and simulate the different atmospheric conditions the rocket may find itself subject to. Software is believed to be the reason French rocket Ariane 5 suffered a disastrous mid-air mishap in June 1996, so there's a lot at stake here. All these processes working in concert should help run a test that produces, in the case of the SLS, 1.6 million pounds of thrust, or 2 million pounds at altitude, consuming as it fires some 2.6 million litres of propellants. Thrust is measured using the TMS, or Thrust Measurement System, which uses a series of load cells to calculate how much upward movement the thrust generates with fuel weight taken into account. Once rocket firing is complete, the real work begins. Some 1,400 sensors arrayed across the test site produce terabytes of data which technicians can pore over in order to make subtle refinements ahead of the big launch. The impact of rocket testing, in particular at Stennis, goes far beyond just firing payloads into space, by the way. The on-site Advanced Technology and Technology Transfer branch was founded by NASA to develop and share the knowledge acquired at Stennis in a way that enriches daily life for everybody, not least the Mississippi economy. In 2018 alone, it's reckoned the work at Stennis benefited the local economy to the tune of $583 million. In case you thought it was just a load of pyromaniacs out there in the deep south having a blast. What do you think? Is the ground testing of rockets every bit as exciting as the lunar missions themselves? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more upwardly mobile tech content.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Sorry.
Loud and clear.
Yeah. So overall, you saw like one of the important things that I know was, of course, the cost. So this is going to cost a lot of money anytime you test a rocket. The nitrogen, the water, the liquid hydrogen. But at the same time, it brought a lot of economic prospects to the town. One of these towns of Mississippi's. So it's a big thing for rocket testing, and it's a continual process, but it's extremely important. Nobody can trust the importance of testing a rocket before you launch it.
So hot it can.
So now we're going to go into more detailed like launch procedures, like what happens the day before, what some teams are responsible for, and how they work all together to make sure the launch occurs. So the launch complex. So this is basically these shuttles that we had. They were vertically launched rockets. They were assembled in a separate hangar, so they weren't assembled on the launch complex. And it's carried by this crawler transporter right here. And Launch Complex 39 uses this method. So it's straight up and it's being transported over here. And this transport could take, I think, about 6 hours. It's about 3.4 miles. So it's a long transport. It's a long transport period because, of course, it's extremely heavy and it's going to be moved extremely slow. But yeah. So these are some important elements from the launch complex. So you have the mobile service structure. So the mobile service structure is over here. It's where you're going to see the inspection teams moving. It's where you're going to see the astronauts getting board. So it's going to be like these stairs and these elevators to access it. Then you got the flame deflector. So I don't know if you guys saw it in the video, but the flame deflector essentially ensures that like the heat and the flames are like dispersed in a safe manner. That's not like harming to any of the equipment, the sensors or any technology there. You've got the launch control and fueling to fuel the tanks. And you have the emergency evacuation system. And then you have this swing arm modifications, which is like this mobile device. It's sometimes described as like the umbilical cord of a rocket, but that's also very important. And one of the key elements of Launch Complex 39, which is a very famous complex, and it's generally used for, it was used for the space shuttle program. So pre-launch, dewar tanks are filled with liquid oxygen and hydrogen. So liquid hydrogen and oxygen, they take up much smaller mass than other elements, but at the same time, they yield a very high specific impulse. So they're extremely efficient in burning the amount of propellant. So that's why they're used oftentimes. You'll see a lot of rockets that use liquid oxygen and hydrogen because it's very effective in ensuring that all the propellant is used up efficiently. So it's a measure of how efficient something is. And the vehicle is powered down in order to attach pyrotechnic devices. Then the flight crew equipment, they begin storing these on board. And launch trusting system monitors or controls, they basically are used to track descent, and they're very important because they turn on like a lot of these monitors, these controls, and whatever like records data to make sure that they can get a ton of data about each launch and analyze it and go through it and see what went wrong and what didn't. But the launch processing system and the monitors, it reduces the launch time by about half the time. So before it used to be at an 80-hour like launch period. Now it's only 40 hours. But it has gone through several modifications. So the days before the launch, so 3 days before, you have the final inspections, and the shuttle main engines are ready for tanking. The final vehicle and facility closeouts are made. So they close the facility, like they close the launch pad a couple of times, and they reopen it after. And the launch pad is cleared of all personnel at 2 days, and liquid oxygen and nitrogen are loaded into the shuttle fuel cell storage tanks. And after this fueling period, the launch pad is reopened. And then T-1 day, communications with mission control is established. The fuel cells are activated and they prepare for the filling of the external tank. So an important part of rocket inspection is what they call the ICE team. So these guys are the last people I would say that inspect all the like the complete rocket, like from head to toe. They have about 2.5 hours to do so. And they're the people with the orange suits, and they have these like multiple equipment, but they have cameras, binoculars, they have infrared sensing devices, and they're all responsible from going from the top. So they start at 255 feet, and they work their way down. They just make sure that everything is final. So they're the final people who like understand whether the rocket's doing fine. They test everything, how it looks, like what they see, any sound. So they report anything or everything to the launch director. They're directly straight to them. And this is the final inspection before the closeout crew and the astronauts begin to head to the rocket. So when T-minus 5 hours or 20 minutes, this is when they begin filling the external tanks with liquid nitrogen and water. The ICE team, which we discussed before, they head in for inspection, and the closeout crew, they're preparing for the boarding of the rocket. Then at T-minus 3 hours, astronauts leave operations and checkout building. This is after a meal and a weather briefing. And after leaving, they eventually enter the orbiter. So part of this is like the weather briefing is, sorry, a lot of times they have delayed a launch. I think a commercial launch they delayed was the SpaceX launch. I think it was might have been last summer or this summer, but they had a launch and they had to delay it due to weather concerns. But also a lot of times they leave like a window for a launch, but this launch was instantaneous. So if they missed the time, they could not go again. And they have these planned holds at the same time to make sure that like if there's any unforeseen circumstances, they can they have more leverage and they can expand the launch window and have enough time to still do the launch. So at T-minus 20 minutes, board computers are commanded to launch. This is when they begin launching and like the launch procedures, and then fuel thermal conditioning begins. So at 5 minutes and 50 seconds, mission control transmits the command to activate instrumentation recorders. These instrumentation recorders are, like, as I stated before, there are other tools that are used to record data. And at 5 minutes, the crew activates the auxiliary power units. At 4 minutes, the final helium purge is initiated, and the rudder and speed brakes are removed, and the rocket is now positioned for launching. When 2 minutes are left, liquid hydrogen is brought to flight pressure, and some of it is released onto the launch pads. Launch pads are not closed, I believe. And then this is with 30 seconds left. The terminal launch sequence begins. Here they can also have another hold, but oftentimes they don't. But the hydraulic power units are activated, and then the solid rocket booster safety destruction system is turned on, and the sound suppression system is turned on. So the sound suppression system, of course, like the sound is like very, very loud, but also to protect all the equipment around, because the acoustic energy is like so high that they need to protect it, like protect the rocket and protect everything around it from its impact. And then in the last 10 seconds, they go for the main engine start is sent out. And the flight computers, they begin to order the opening of valves, which allow liquid hydrogen to flow through and oxygen to flow through the turbo pumps. The 3 main engines are ignited within intervals of 120 milliseconds, and the engine throttle is brought up to 90% for 3 seconds. And once these engines are like brought up, the launch is essentially like committed, and the solid rocket boosters are ignited. And then at 1 second, the whole down explosive belts are removed. And about 7 seconds later, after they've turned on everything, the rocket will begin to like rise and it will begin its ascent up to space. So here's like the final space shuttle, so the launch operation, and here's a quick time lapse.
The final mission for America's space shuttle fleet began with the shuttle Atlantis in this processing hangar. The ship was there for weeks to check and recheck its millions of parts, making sure the very last shuttle was ready to haul 14 tons of food, equipment, and supplies to the International Space Station. Once Atlantis was announced fit to fly, the next step in this final trip was the procedure known as rollover. That began with Atlantis being towed from its processing hangar to the vehicle assembly building, following a path well worn by 134 other shuttle missions over 30 years of flying. 3 photographers documented this process with time-lapse pictures shot over the course of 4 days. In all, 15 cameras captured 120,000 images. Once inside the vehicle assembly building, the country's largest building by volume east of the Mississippi, Atlantis was lifted by a halter crane. It was then attached to its giant solid fuel boosters and to its 15-story liquid fuel tank. When that was completed, the shuttle emerged to begin its 6-hour slow crawl to the launch pad. Shuttle workers gathered by the hundreds to witness the space shuttle's final rollout, and with good and sentimental reason. 355 humans flew over the course of 135 shuttle missions from 1981 through 2011. The shuttle's secret was in some ways its very lack of glamour. It was a reusable workhorse ship that got humans and equipment to and from space, and in so doing helped ensure America's future off the planet. This launch of 2 astronauts aboard a SpaceX rocket, the first such launch from American soil since Atlantis's flight, is the next big step in that future.
So now I'm going to share this screen, and I'm also going to try and share this in the chat link. So essentially, this is a trek they have through the Kennedy Space Center, and it marks like the important landmarks, and you guys can watch and see whatever it is you guys want to see. And I'm just going to take you through it quickly, but you got all these locations that they take you through, and they give you enough information about each part and why they're historic. So this is the Endeavour space shuttle, and the important part of the Endeavour is that, like it said in the video, is they have this assembly building just built for these shuttles. So let's see if we can take it inside. There. So as you guys can see, like you can go through and you can find each part. You can find like a lot of parts of the Kennedy Space Center. And this is where everything is assembled in preparation for launch, as we saw. So let's see the front. So again, it's lifted eventually and then put on the crawler, which it carries to the launch complex. And then here's the firing room. So that's also where they communicate with the astronauts as to, what they have to do, what they have to go through, what the procedures they have to go through, and just the important information that they have to remember. Let's see. And that was the Atlantis space shuttle, which is another space shuttle that was used, which was very important. We've got the firing room. And this is the processing place. So this is where a lot of astronauts stay before the space launch. And then finally, another important thing that I saw about the launch is that it's a lot of the launches, like I said, is near the beach, because when they were created, it was feared that they would fall in the water, so it wouldn't destroy any land. But a lot of issues that are rising now is on the beach. Is one like the rising sea levels. So that's been sort of a fear for NASA. They've been fearing the fact that the rising sea levels could impact like these launch complexes, and they won't be able to launch rockets anymore because of the rising sea levels. And also, there's been like erosion and weathering. So there's been a lot of concern over the future and where they're going to have like the launch sites, because this is in Florida, which is a huge place for launching. So that's why they're sort of reflecting upon how they're going to move the launch sites and how they're going to change where they launch their rockets. So that's all I have for the presentation, but we're going to end this aerospace session just with a Kahoot. It's going to be a quick Kahoot. It's going to be 14 questions, and it's going to be on space launches. So I'll share the link first. Is anybody having trouble getting in, or is this everybody's gonna come? Okay, well, I'll give another 30 seconds and then we'll start the code. So G-force is a measurement of the type of force per unit mass, and 1G is about 9.8 meters per second, which is the gravitational acceleration on Earth. There are two right answers for this one. Good job, Tabu. Colin, very good. And then Barada, great job, Colin, you won. And the runner-ups, Christian Baptist and Commander. So that is all I have for aerospace. I hope you enjoyed and thank you.